This time we look at 5 underrated motorcycles. Now, as a sort of follow-on to our overrated selection, don't worry, we'll be going back to that subject at some point soon. This time we're going to look at 5 bikes that we regard as underrated. 5 really great machines that really don't receive the love that perhaps they deserve. The Triumph T140 Bonneville and TR7 Tiger 750. When it comes to Bonnevilles, people generally want pre-unit bikes or a unit machine from the late 60s, 1968 being seen as a particularly tasty year for the Bonneville. What this means is that those bikes that fit into that particular window tend to be rather pricey, but that doesn't mean that the alternatives are actually any worse. The T140 is very much the unloved child of the Bonneville T120. Whilst many people heap praise on the earlier bikes, the same cannot be said for the T140. But does this mean it's a poor bike? The T140 is cheap and easy to get hold of, largely due to its lack of popularity, and yet offers reasonable performance, particularly if used on A roads, nice handling and decent brakes. It can also be made pretty reliable too, and is as easy to service as all the rest of the Bonneville range. The styling, in all honesty, isn't really quite as good as the late 60s bike, but don't let that put you off. The T140 has a great look all of its own. It's not an ugly bike, and those square tank ones have a sort of nice 70s kitsch about them. People generally prefer the smaller peanut tank that you find on the American models, but whichever one you buy, these are really great bikes. One of the major criticisms levelled at the bike is its excessive vibration at higher speeds, but trust me, having known to mid-60s Triumph, they can shake pretty well too. Triumph did address this, and you do find rubber mounted bars and rubber mounted pegs and tank on most models, and in fact some very rare, much later models even had their engines rubber mounted. On the right road and treated the right way, the bike makes a really wonderful A-road blaster. Compared to the T120, the engine's a bit less busy. It's a lower revving beast, so if you like just driving in top gear and using the torque to pull you out of corners, the T140 is an excellent choice, and one that is deserving of a bit more love than it currently gets. Motogutsi's V50 and V35 range. When it comes to Motogutsi's of the late 70s and early 80s, people will generally have the 850 Le Mans in mind. A great bike, absolutely no doubt about that. But the V50 in many ways is often regarded as the best range of bikes ever created by Moto Guzzi. Now, many people will pour scorn on this statement, but from an engineering point of view it's certainly true. The engine was designed much later than the earlier big block engines and has a number of differences. The bikes are far lighter than the big block engines and deliver performance which is actually fairly comparable to some models. The bike is light, nimble and stops fantastically. Early bikes had some reliability problems. The Mark II was quickly introduced and this fixed most of those problems. If you compare it to say a BMW of the period, it's far lighter and more nimble. The gear change is similarly clunky, but having ridden an R850 of that period, I can say the Guzzi gearbox, although clunky, is definitely better than the Beamer one, and the machine is a lot more fun too. The only downsides with these bikes tend to be that they're quite small, which isn't a great problem if you're under 6 foot. If you're much over 6 foot tall, you may find them a bit cramped. Having said that, Tom currently owns a sporty model and he's just over 6 foot and fits on it no problem at all. The BSA 810. In its day, compared to its competitors, the Norton Dominator, and of course Triumph's Bonneville and T110 range, the 810 was seen as something of an old man's bike. But on the road the engine is smoother and more refined feeling than the Triumph engine. It's also less prone to leaks because its pushrod tubes are actually cast integrally. The frame design is extremely good. It's not quite as good as the Dominator with its featherbed frame, but it will comfortably outperform a Bonneville through the corners, and is as good as pretty much anything else on the road at that time. The inlet manifold was cast integrally with a cylinder head, so it's very difficult to actually put a second carburettor on the thing. BSA presumably did this to cut tooling costs, but this doesn't make a great difference really. Twin carb engines tend to go out of balance and tend to cause more vibration. The 810 was very much conceived as a sports tourer. In its basic form, the Gold Flash, and makes around 35 horsepower and has a top speed of just about 100 miles an hour. More sporty versions such as the Road Rocket and the extremely collectible Rocket Gold Star of course will cost you more money but offer greater performance. Top speed for any of these bikes isn't going to go much above 110 miles an hour even for the more sporty models, but they do offer a great all-round package that's usually much cheaper to buy than the equivalent Triumph or Norton. And for the modern classic rider, its lack of performance, relatively speaking, really doesn't matter a jot, because what you're really looking for in a classic these days is something with good low down torque that's easy to live with and easy to ride. And in that sense, the A10 is definitely very much a winner. The Yamaha TDM 850. Although there were adventure-style bikes around before the TDM is very much ground zero for the modern off-road adventure-style bike that isn't really an off-road adventure-style bike, if you like, which is in fact the bulk of the adventure-style market. The machine was conceived very much as a crossover, a sort of do-all-things for all people kind of a bike, a concept not dissimilar to the modern Kawasaki Versys idea, a universal machine, if you like. The bike was in production between 1991 and 2011, initially as an 850, but later on as a 900cc. It used a parallel twin engine which had a 360-degree crank, rather like an old British bike. In other words, the pistons went up and down together. The engine used a balance shaft to smooth all this out, so vibration wasn't too bad at all. One thing that could never be said for this machine is that it's a great looker. Beauty may be in the eye of the beholder, but very few people really liked the style of the TDM. It was just that little bit too different, and that probably adversely affected sales, although not too much because it was a popular machine of its time, simply because it was so damn useful. You could scratch on it, do some light off-roading, tour on it, and really do just about anything. The motor was derived from Yamaha's XTZ750 Paris-Dakar racer bike, so for normal road use it was pretty tough. It developed great bottom end torque and was fairly smooth in use. It was also one of the first bikes to really concentrate on mass centralisation. You notice that the gearbox is positioned almost directly above the crankshaft. To me it seems quite sad that the bike is largely forgotten, and yet was really the progenitor of most of the bikes that people like to ride around on today. It offered a great combination of light off-road work, interesting styling shall we say, but great all-round abilities. Probably one of the most influential machines of the last 25 years. And a bike that still makes a great all-rounder today. Suzuki's GS750. When it comes to classic Japanese fours of the 1970s, people generally think about Honda's CB750 or Kawasaki's mighty Z1. Other machines tend to fade in the shadow of these mighty bikes. And this is not surprising. Kawasaki's Z1 is incredibly powerful. Around 80 horsepower was a massive figure in the 1970s. But in many ways, Suzuki's more humble GS750 is a better all-round package. The GS750 was introduced in 1976 and was really in full sale mode by 1977. The engine is said to be very closely based on Kawasaki's. Suzuki pretty much bankrupted themselves developing their RE5 rotary bike a couple of years earlier, and so really needed to get back in the game. They did this by essentially copying Kawasaki's mighty engine and moving it down a few cc's to 750, then a very popular capacity. This is of course no bad thing. The Z1 engine is an incredibly robust beast, and the Suzuki pretty much follows suit and gives great performance. Around 68 horsepower was no mean figure in the mid-70s. So why is the GS a better choice perhaps than the much more famous Z1? And the answer is quite simply in the all-round package. The frame was more rigid than you find on the Kawasaki or the Hondas, and the suspension gave much better feel too. The result of this was a much nice handling machine than either the Kawasaki or the Honda. In truth, the chassis feel wasn't as good as it would be on say a Triumph of the period, but it was still pretty good and represented quite a leap forward for four-cylinder bikes of that time. This is a refined and reliable machine. Only real problems tend to be electrical. Suzuki tended to use a separate regulator and rectifier in this period, and these were pretty much the only things on the bike which were regularly known to give trouble. The GS750 is, all round, a wonderful bike and definitely worth considering. The styling may be a little bit staid compared to the funkier Kawasaki, but don't be put off, the bike is an absolute goer. So there you have it, a nice selection of 5 what I think are underrated motorcycles. Which bikes do you think are underrated? There are a lot of bikes out there which really did give their riders great service, but don't seem to receive the love that certain other bikes do. So what bikes would you choose? What bikes would you put on a list of 5 underrated bikes? Let us know below. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, thank you very much for watching.